Hi, this is Patricia Stepler with your Inside Power, where we are showing you how to learn to live from the inside out so that you accomplish more in a year than most people accomplish maybe in 5 or 10 years. So this lesson is really important today because we're talking about goals, and goals are super important if you are to achieve what you want in life. Now, sometimes people think the goals are a waste of time. Well, why do people think that? Well, chances are that they have set a goal at one point in their life, but because they didn't know the steps to follow and they didn't know the process of goal achieving, not just goal setting, because goal setting is just an academic process. Goal achieving is where you learn how to actually go about getting that goal. So, most people have set a goal in the past, they didn't achieve it, and therefore they don't think setting goals works. Well, that's not the problem. The problem is not goal setting. The problem is you don't know the process. Remember, goal setting, anybody can do that. It's just a matter of writing something down. It's totally intellectual. When you achieve a goal, there's a process that must be followed. Okay, so here's part of the problem. Most people don't write their goals down. They may say, oh, I think I'll earn, $100,000 this year, but they don't write it down. There's something very magical. I can't explain it. I know if you looked at the science, you could go through it and there's a scientific explanation for it all, but there's something magical when you write it down. It's like sometimes I'll write a grocery list before I go to the grocery store. And then I forget to take my list with me. And when I've written it down, I almost always remember everything on the list, or at least like 90 to 95%. There's just something magical of having written it down. So the first thing in goal achieving, instead of just goal setting, is you must write it down. You get this idea, you have the ability to achieve it. See, that's one thing. I don't believe you're ever given an idea for a goal that you cannot achieve. Now, that doesn't mean you have all the talents developed, but you have the capability of developing those talents you need to achieve that goal. So I don't believe it's a game, a cruel game where you get this great idea, but you're not given the tools that you need to achieve it. I don't believe that. I believe you have the ability to achieve it. When I first started my business, I didn't have all the tools I needed to build the business. I had this great dream. And I had two choices: to stop and quit, or to keep persisting and tune myself and develop the skills I needed. Well, I'm here, so I guess you know which one I chose. But you have to realize that when you get that idea, it doesn't mean that immediately everything's going to fall in place just because you have a goal and you wrote it down. That's not the way it works. You see, you have to first become the person you need to be, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you have to learn how to believe in yourself. You see, I believed in me. I believed I had the ability. I believed that I was capable of achieving my goal. I could see myself achieving my goal. That didn't mean I was ready to. So when you have that belief, you see, that belief gives you the inspiration to keep plugging away and keep persisting. So often we allow what others say to us to discourage us and dampen our feelings, and then we don't realize, or we don't have the capacity to keep persisting. So what I want to share with you over this next, like 24 minutes or whatever we have left, is information on goal setting and the importance of setting and achieving goals. Again, setting is just something you do, intellectual activity. Achieving goals is a process. So some of you may say, oh my gosh, I've heard all this before. I know all about achieving goals. Well, then great. Then that means that you've achieved all your goals, right? But if you haven't achieved all your goals, you probably have something that you can still learn. So give this some thought And at the very least, it might be just a good reminder of things that you already know. So I believe that you will find some new ideas as you're listening, or a new take on an old idea. Because you see, everybody says things a little bit differently. And sometimes you need to hear it in a different way. And it's like, oh, now I get it. I remember one time as a training with Bob Proctor, and this was not the first training I was at as a consultant for his company. I'd been at several before. And I remember being in the elevator with one of the leaders. And I said, my gosh, I said, that was the best I've ever heard him talk. Bob did such a great job, and it makes so much sense. And I could tell by the expression on this guy's face that he didn't have that same feeling. But you see, at some point during that talk, it was probably not that Bob said anything different. It was that I was ready. And if you've ever heard that statement, when the student's ready, the teacher appears, that's so true. And it's not necessarily a new teacher. It might just be that you are now ready. You are open. You are ready for that next bit of information. You see, you can hear the same thing over and over again and hear different things in it. For instance, I often will take my iPod with me on a walk, and I'll listen to a recording. And sometimes I'll listen to the same recording every day for a week. And maybe on the last day, I'm like, oh my gosh, I never heard that before. Well, of course I heard it before. It's the same audio, right? I just didn't hear it. Now, why does that happen? Well, you see, the way the brain works is you can go along and you can hear something, and then all of a sudden you hear something and your mind goes off track, and you get this idea and your mind starts wandering. And then pretty soon you come back down and you start listening to that recording again. And all of a sudden, boom, something happens and your mind drifts off to something else. And that's what happens. You know, it's just like, have you ever seen a movie and then you watched it again and like, I don't remember that scene. That happened to me once. We were watching Pirates of the Caribbean, and there was this one scene, I don't remember which one it was, whether it was 1, 2, or 3, whatever. But there was this one scene, I'm like, I don't ever remember that scene. Well, I'd seen that movie a couple times. Why didn't I remember it? I don't know. So what I'm saying is, you may think you've heard this all before, and you may have, but today you are not the same person you were yesterday. And therefore, you may hear something a little bit different than you heard yesterday. One of the things I always tell my clients is we need to set the right kind of goal, a goal that inspires us, a goal that stretches us, a goal that makes us do different things and become a different person than we are today. Now, with that, I also want to caution, sometimes people stretch to what I consider an unrealistic goal. Like I remember hearing this one guy, and I don't know how much he was earning, but he says, I'm not just going to become a millionaire. So he wasn't earning $1 million. He said, I'm going to be a billionaire. Well, that's a wonderful idea, to become a billionaire. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't know that his mind could accept that. Can you accept the idea that you can be a billionaire if you've never even made $1 million? I'm not sure your mind can accept that you can be a billionaire if you're sitting at 100 million. That's still quite a bit. So my point is, we need to set a goal that stretches us, that inspires us, that makes us excited to get up in the morning. But we don't want to set a goal that is too big for us to wrap our heads around, so to speak, and it seems so unrealistic to us that we absolutely do nothing. There's the danger in setting a goal that's too big. Now, if he took that goal of being a billionaire and said, I'm going to be a billionaire this year, I'm going to work on becoming, six-figure income, maybe a high six-figure income. And so now that billionaire goal was out in the distance, but here's my focus. I want to make a 6-figure income this year. Do you see the difference? That's probably something that he can believe. And then you can start breaking that down and you can start focusing on, what am I going to do this quarter? What am I going to do this month, this week, today? So the other thing, and I was listening to a goal setting information one day, and they were like, set your goals and set your goal in this area of life, like your emotional and your spiritual and your health and your finances and your vocation and, your social life. And it was like setting all these different goals. And I thought, that's too many goals. There's nothing wrong with wanting to look at where you are today in all those areas and where you'd like to be. The danger in setting maybe 10 different goals in 10 different areas of your life is that your mind, again, cannot concentrate on 10 different goals. So you still have to pick one or two. Like I said, you may look at where you are, financially and professionally and spiritually and socially and family and children and so on. You can look at where you are today and say, well, this is where I'd like to be, but then find 1 or 2, 3 at the very most. I usually try to get my clients to look at a personal goal, like divide all those different areas of your life into personal and professional, and find a personal goal and a professional goal to work on. That way, you're not confusing yourself. And here's what happens. So often, when we start focusing and concentrating on one goal, the other ones start to fall in line, and it just becomes fabulous. Okay, so those are my first basic things about goals. Now, next thing I want you to think about is, when we focus and when we learn how to focus, ideas will start to come to us. So I want you to get an idea book so that you can write down ideas as they come to you. Now, not all those ideas are going to be good. I can tell you that right now, but start writing them down, because sometimes you get a really good idea. And I know I'm so guilty of this. So, I don't always practice what I preach, but sometimes I'll get an idea and I'm thinking, oh, that's so good. I'll never forget that. And part of my problem is some of my best thinking is done in a shower. I don't know about you. I get these ideas. And then if I don't come out and write them down right away, I do tend to forget them. And then I'll think later, oh my gosh, what was that? It was so perfect. So get an idea book, and particularly have a journal when you meditate so that you can write ideas down, because that's when things will come to you, when your mind is quieted. And, I know I'm not the only person that feels like they do the best thinking in the shower, but you have that water coming over you and it's very calming, and ideas will come because you've quieted your mind. You're not, looking at your computer and thinking about all the things you have to get done today. You're just quieting the mind. So let me talk about frustration. Frustration is one of those things that does cause people not to set goals. We look at disappointments that we've had, and we think that we're not good enough or we're not capable enough. And I want you to realize that when you have a disappointment or a roadblock or something that gets in the way of your goal, I want you to start thinking of it as a test. This is a test because it's like there's these guardian angels out there. Maybe they're not angels, I don't know, but there's these guardians out there, and they're watching over you, and they're testing you to see if you really want that goal. Because if you've set a really big goal, you're going to need their help. You're going to need the universe, the source energy, as help to achieve that goal. And you're going to need the ideas that's going to come to your subconscious mind through source energy. Now, when I say source energy, I sometimes say God, infinite intelligence, whatever word you have for that higher power that's bigger than you. So these guardian angels sometimes will get a roadblock in your way to see how you handle it. I don't know of anybody who has started at point A and gone straight to success to point B. Success is not a straight line. Success is a very crooked line, and it goes back and forth. And sometimes it goes down before it goes up. Sometimes you have that dip before you can even get going. So success is never a straight line. When you see somebody that's highly successful, they may appear as if nothing has ever gone wrong for them. Let me tell you, that's not true. I guarantee you they have had disappointments in their life. They have had things that did not work out, and they have had to overcome something. So when you get frustrated, stop it. This is your test. And the way you respond to that test shows your character. Do you respond by, crawling in bed and pulling the covers over your head and saying, I just can't do this? Or do you respond by saying, okay, that didn't work. Let's move on. Let's figure this out. Maybe I wasn't listening to that idea that I got the other day that maybe was the right choice. So if you've ever been frustrated because a goal didn't turn out, keep in mind, we've all been there. There's nothing wrong with disappointments. Disappointments build character because not everything is hunky-dory all the time. And stop thinking that you're not good enough. You wouldn't have the idea if you weren't good enough to achieve it. What we have to realize is that there may be another experience we need to go through in order to accomplish it. I remember one of the most difficult times I went through when I was an educator, and it was painful. I mean, it was just so bad that when I was going through it, I thought I had a neurological disease because I couldn't get off the couch. I felt like I couldn't move. I just was totally physically and mentally drained by this situation. And the fear, so this was during the summer when teachers weren't teaching, and the fear of having to go back into that building, back in the fall, and be in that situation again, I couldn't handle it. And I physically and mentally broke down. What I realized was that was my test. And when I went down and I talked to my principal about what was going on, and he shared with me some of the hits he was taking we were both involved in this project and we were both taking hits. And he shared with me and he looked at me and he said, I believe that you're going to be in charge of this committee. Well, this committee was one where teachers had to vote for you. And I looked at him and I started to laugh and I said, it's never going to happen. These people hate me. And what he said to me next was, you just have to change the way you deal with them. So anyhow, I went back with a totally different attitude. I, started to research and started to work. And he was right. Sometimes the problem is us. And sometimes we have to learn to get out of our way. So I went back, I changed me. That's why personal development is so very important. Sometimes people just don't, kind of brush it off as it's not important. It is so important because you have to know how to change you to deal with other people. It's not their responsibility to change them so they can deal with you. It's your responsibility to change you so you can deal with them. So when I changed me, I became a different person. And what I realized was, as painful as that whole experience had been for almost 10 months, I would do it again because of how much I grew personally out of that. So what you have to realize is what happened yesterday does not impact today, and it doesn't impact tomorrow unless you choose to allow it to hamper your life. Your life is ahead of you. It's not behind you. So you have to learn what it is you need to do. Sometimes when we set those big goals, what we don't realize is that we've set a goal that's in conflict with a belief that we currently hold, what we call limiting belief. Those limiting beliefs are stored within your subconscious mind. And what they do is they cause conflict in you. So you want to do something, that very thing you want to do is in conflict with your mind, and therefore nothing happens. Every once in a while, I get a client who thinks they don't have any limiting beliefs. And I'm here to tell you, everybody has limiting belief at some point. Yours may just be at a higher mountain peak than others. You know, you may have solved a lot of the lower limiting beliefs, but at some point you're going to find a limiting belief that you have. Finding them and dealing with them changes your future. So goals that negatively impact on your limiting belief are ones that will cause frustration in you. And they will cause you to want to stay in your little comfort zone, but you can't. You cannot stay in your comfort zone and have growth. It doesn't work. So we have to, build the confidence. We have to change that thinking, that limiting belief. How do you do that? Let's just take that for a minute. So if you have a limiting belief, like maybe you can't afford something, that's a limiting belief. Not being afforded, that's ridiculous. If you really want something bad enough, you find a way. Think of everything in your life that you really wanted. And when you really wanted it enough, you figured out a way. So if you're saying you can't afford it, it's because you really don't want it, or you haven't built that desire. So I was traveling a few months ago, and I took an Uber to the airport, and my Uber driver had a beautiful Tesla. Well, I'd never been in a Tesla. I'd never really seen one close up. I've seen them on the highway, somebody's driving by me, but I'd never seen one close up. There's no Tesla, dealerships, and there's nobody I know that drives a Tesla, right? So I got to ride in this Tesla. And so as we're riding to the airport, I'm asking him all these questions about his car. And, I really, had never thought of ever wanting a Tesla. Don't really want an electric vehicle. For various reasons. But anyhow, I'm riding this Tesla and I'm seeing it, and I'm experiencing something I'd never experienced before. And as I'm experiencing being in this Tesla, I'm like, hey, this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe I do need a Tesla. I just don't need a Tesla that, when I drive a long distance and I want to keep going, like for 1,000 miles in a day or whatever, but maybe I do need a Tesla. I'd have never thought that had I not experienced it. So you have to realize that there are experiences that you need to go through. And I wouldn't say it was limiting belief, but I'm never going to believe that I'm going to be driving a Tesla if I never experienced that. Now I can at least see myself maybe driving a Tesla, maybe having a Tesla, because I experienced it. Well, that's the way all goals are. We don't necessarily know everything and all the experiences. And sometimes we don't realize that maybe we have a limiting belief. I mean, I think subconsciously, part of my limiting belief was the amount of money a Tesla cost. And I never thought I'd want to spend that much money on a car. But then when I was in it, I'm thinking, this is pretty nice. Maybe I do want to. So to think that I did not want to spend that much money on a Tesla was because I never experienced it. And that's the way, we have to start thinking there's limiting beliefs. Sometimes we don't realize we have limiting belief because we've never been forced to think about it. So maybe that makes a little sense. So let me just kind of conclude here, because I know we are running out of time. But when we think of a goal, we have to also think of that definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Is that you with your goals? Are you setting a goal to maybe earn $1 million, and yet you're not figuring out what you need to do to change your actions so that you actually have a chance of earning that kind of money? I see this as a big problem. People set goals and they think that, maybe if they just do a little bit, they'll reach it. Chances are, if you have a pretty massive goal from where you are to where you want to be, and it's pretty big, you're going to have to do something different. Because if you think what you're doing today will get you there, well, then it should have already gotten you there, right? So to move from where you are to where you want to be, you're going to have to do something different. Sometimes one of the things we really have to focus on is changing our thoughts and actions and the words we say. So that's what attitude is: thoughts, words, actions. Okay. So we're going to have to change the way we think, just like I'm changing the way I think about a Tesla. And you're going to have to change what you're doing. And think about those limiting beliefs, because the limiting beliefs are keeping us from believing in us. You see, we may say, well, I don't really ever want a Tesla, but is that really the truth? Or is it a limiting belief that I shouldn't have a car that costs that much, or that I can't afford a car that costs that much? What's the real truth? So we got to start changing these limiting beliefs around, changing them around by the words you say, the thoughts you think. We need to find those beliefs that we may have that aren't serving us well and change them. So to change them, we write down where we are now. We write down the opposite of it. If we have something that's not serving us well, what's the opposite of it? And once you write the opposite down, then get rid of that one and start focusing on the reality that you want, not the reality that you're currently in. You see, we create our own reality, whether we realize it or not. And I didn't realize this for years, but it's your choice. And you can create your own reality. So are you choosing the reality you want? Or are you allowing the reality around you? You're allowing the world to just toss you around. So that's a choice. I would love to connect with you, and I would love to have you join my Facebook group, which is Millionaire Mindset, and it's all about abundance. And I have some special information in there that you can only get in my Facebook group. So I'd love to have you join me and connect with me and reach out and tell me that you watched one of the TV shows, and we can book a call and let's have a chat, and let me see what I can do to help you to reach your goals and to become the person that you need to be. This was such a small fraction of the information I wanted to share with you. So maybe next week we'll continue with other ways that you can take your goal and move it forward. It's Patricia Stepler with your Inside Power. I want you to be the magic in your dreams.